Who doesn't love a good story? I know I do. So I thought we would start today off with a little bit of circle time to take us back to our childhood. So, once upon a time, there was a Greek king who sat on the throne with his beautiful queen beside him. They had children together and lived happily ever after. Until the beautiful queen got herself a side dude, and the two of them whacked the king in the back with an axe so that they could rule the kingdom together. Eventually, though, the original king's son got salty and killed his mom, the queen, and her side dude. This made the Greek gods upset because apparently murdering your mom is not okay. So they decided that bloodshed of the mortals was in order, and lots of people died. The end. Now I know what you're thinking. How in the world is that a legitimate childhood story? Well, if you didn't already, that was a summary of Orestia, a Greek tragedy first performed in 458 BCE. Greek tragedy is defined by the Collins English Dictionary as a play in which the protagonist, usually a person of importance and outstanding personal qualities, falls to disaster through the combination of a personal failing and or circumstances with which he or she cannot deal. That being said, while this is an extreme example of trauma, it does come to show how tragedy has been an integral part of the human experience since the beginning of time. According to the National Council of Behavioral Health, 70% of adults in the US have experienced trauma. Not only that, but 1 in 4 children and adolescents experiences a potentially traumatic event. Personally, I fall into this category and went through trauma involving my own grandmother's death when I was 11. Would argue though that I'm not alone, because all of us have been through trauma to some degree, and it goes by the name of none other than 2020. We have been through a global pandemic, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, murder hornets, unemployment, impeachment, an election year, and the list could go on. This comes to show that tragedy, whether Greek or American, is ever present in our world. However, in the status quo, our society has no idea how to address trauma. This is a major issue because of its impact on our lives. Therefore, today, I intend to show the short-term and long-term consequences of trauma, how our society exacerbates these harms, and what we can do to ensure that the curtains don't close on our lives, as they did for our Greek friends in Orestia. Now, tragedy in and of itself is a multifaceted experience that affects individuals initially and in the future. It is best addressed through specialized care. However, many trauma victims choose to forego treatment in any capacity, and thus are left to deal with the crippling consequences of not adequately addressing trauma. In the short term, trauma affects emotional, physical, and cognitive well-being, which are all major issues. Moreover, longevity-wise, studies suggest that untreated tragedy is directly linked to increased addiction and suicide. A study done by the National Survey of Adolescents showed that 70% of substance abuse patients had a history of trauma. Additionally, and even more saddening, a study done by the European Journal of Psychotraumatology showed that 76% of suicidal individuals had experienced trauma in their past. What is made blatantly clear by these statistics is that the impact of untreated tragedy extends far beyond the immediate consequences. These medical and psychological effects alone are enough for individuals to deal with. However, societal exacerbation is another key issue. Specifically, our societal response to tragedy when it strikes an individual can often be unintentionally toxic. This toxicity is made evident by common phrases that we have all either heard or said, such as, "I'm so sorry for your loss," or "time will heal the heart," These are both well-intentioned things to say, but they often begin to feel insensitive and robotic to victims. These initial responses then lead to an even greater issue, which is our society's, quote, tough it out mindset. This outlook asserts that we should be strong, hold it all together, and carry the weight of our burdens alone. If you don't believe me, we can look to what prominent figures in our society preach. American hottie Justin Timberlake once said, "Cry me a river, build a bridge, and get over it." Southern Spitfire Miranda Lambert says in her very own song, "My mama came from a softer generation, where you get a grip and bite your lip." And last but not least, thousands of years ago, the Greeks had their own tough it out mindset, known as murder, but at least we've gotten past that. When looking at all of this, it is clear that our strength is supposedly found in keeping ourselves together. However, trauma is something that can only be addressed when victims are allowed to first fall apart before being forced to put themselves back together. From my own experience, I know this to be true because I was struggling a lot and I desperately needed help. I needed that treatment, but I didn't want it because I told myself that I just needed to, quote, tough it out. When looking at all of this in conjunction, it is certain that trauma has short-term and long-term consequences that are often exacerbated by our own initial response to tragedy and our societal tough it out mindset. This then begs the question, though, of what can we do to address trauma, whether it be in our own lives or in the lives of others? The answer to this question falls nicely under a mnemonic device known as REAP, which stands for recognize, encourage, enjoy, and propose. The first step is to recognize that trauma victims have a unique experience associated with physical, cognitive, and mental harms. On an individual level, this is equally as important because awareness of the situation is crucial. The second step is to encourage. Being a positive light for someone during dark times can often have a lasting impact. For the individual, the same is true because self-encouragement is key. The third step is to enjoy, and it's as simple as it sounds. Having fun, doing things that we love, and spending time with family are often the best medicines for a hurting soul. And the final step is to propose. And I'm not talking about getting on one knee and marrying someone out of pity. Instead, I mean proposing treatment for yourself or for others is the final way to address tragedy, which leads to the biggest solution of all: trauma-informed care. The University of Buffalo defines trauma-informed care as an approach in the human service field that assumes that an individual is more likely than not to have a history of trauma. On an organizational or systemic level, it emphasizes respecting and appropriately responding to trauma at all levels. When speaking to the actual impact of this, Stevens 2012 reports that in one school alone, trauma-informed care reduced suspensions by 80%. What this shows us is that when we can commit to simple measures such as REAP, we can, in fact, make a major difference. This is vital to consider because all of us have gone through or will likely go through trauma. Thus, we must seek to address it through treatment and through changing the game one person at a time. Each of you listening today has the necessary tools to create a world in which trauma no longer has to go unaddressed and invalidated. In the world as we know it, we have seen it all. And many of us would even say that life is tragic. But the important distinction between us and that of the Greeks is that the curtains don't have to close on our lives. Thus, it is up to us to make life's tragedy a story worth telling.